Yasher Koach, Leah. Leah, there are so many reasons why we are kvelling for you this morning. Your laning, your Torah chanting and Haftorah chanting, and also your interpretation of that Torah portion. And I want to applaud you for diving deep into the topic of our time in your Devar Torah, not shying away from our present moment. October 7th was, as we remember, Simchat Torah, which means that from the very beginning of our Torah reading cycle this year, we have read each week's Parsha through the lens of the war between Israel and Hamas. How then can we not hear an echo of our time this week as we read of the Israelites scouting out the land of Israel for the very first time? The 10 of the famous 12 spies are, as you taught us, driven by fear. Though they have every indication that God will guide them into their promised land, they don't believe it. And when they come back and share with the people that there are unconquerable giants that inhabit that land, the Israelites weep all night. They lament that they were better off dying in Egypt and scheme how to return to that place. Narrow and painful though it was, Egypt was at least familiar. They're traumatized. And it's because of this trauma that they resort to the scripts of what they knew: slavery, oppression, and despair. It didn't matter that this group literally encountered God more closely than anyone in Jewish history. They were stuck in old ways of thinking and couldn't see a way out of their own cycles of fear. This was the connection that you drew to the war today, Leah. And you offered a poignant moral charge to our Israeli siblings, especially, to move beyond their trauma response vis-a-vis the Palestinians, to evolve out of a reactive us versus them mentality. And though I certainly agree with this charge, or more aptly, this hope, I know it will take time. It is no small feat to move beyond what is human and visceral into what is humane and spiritual. That transition will require the loving, if urgent, understanding of American Jews willing to work toward building an Israeli society ready to live peacefully with Palestinians. The rabbis have spoken from this bima many, many times by now about the false binary of our political life. How it really is possible to support both Israelis and Palestinians seeking to live in freedom, safety, and dignity, and how we must not lose that essential thread amidst the very loud voices who say otherwise. Like the Israelite scouts in this Parsha, many of us have been affected by the trauma of October 7th and, of course, the horrific death tolls in Gaza. And against this destabilizing backdrop, it would be natural for any of us to return to old familiar scripts, behavioral defaults that are comforting, where we know what to do and what to say because it's what we've always done and said. We stand with Israel, or we stand with Palestine, reacting, protesting, counter-protesting, when we know these familiar scripts won't get us very far, or at least they won't lead us to any new conclusion. Scripts like these ones are so ingrained in our public discourse that we can kind of guess how conversations or political controversies are going to unfold because, well, we've been in this Groundhog Day now of repeating the same routine for nearly 9 months now. One of the many afflictions of this political era is that, depending on which community we're part of, we're expected to stick to a specific story, as if it's written for us. These stories can be comforting because during a time of so much unknown, they can feel like familiar guardrails. And during these months, I know it's been hard for any of us to find some words beyond those scripts, beyond just what we're hearing. As someone who prepares frequently to address audiences, I have felt so many times like I'm standing on stage, looking into a spotlight, frozen, desperate to call out line from the sides, and hope that someone supplies some wisdom from the wings. But the truth is that all those scripts to which we're accustomed haven't gotten us very far. They constrain us. And like the Israelites in this week's Parsha, they keep us wandering far away from where we want to be. Among the important lessons you drew from the Torah portion, Leah, I want to focus on the verb latur, which you pointed out is used to describe the spies scouting the land when so many other verbs could have been used. As you put it, by using the word latur, the text indicates that God wanted the Israelites to seek out the good in Canaan, which, as we come to learn, only Joshua and Caleb are able to do, while the other 10 resort to scripts of failure and impotence. What then made Joshua and Caleb different? Our sages say that they were both humble and wise. They listened when others spoke, and most importantly, they understood their mission in scouting the land. Typically, we refer to the 12 men that Moses sends as miraglim, as spies. But that word, liragel, which means more literally to spy, does not appear in this Torah portion. Instead, we read latur. Not to spy exactly, but as Ibn Ezra points out, it means to look for something. Joshua and Caleb understood this. Perhaps while the other 10 men were spying, focused on military limitations and fearful of their own inadequacies, Joshua and Caleb were fulfilling their true mission to look at the big picture. They were looking at the land and looking at themselves, and before jumping to the conclusion that they were merely grasshoppers in the face of giants, they looked for a way to believe in God's promise. That word, if you'll indulge me, latur, is a pretty unusual one. It only appears 23 times in the entire Tanakh. 13 of those times are in this parsha. Clearly, the Torah means to emphasize the Israelites' mandate to look for something here. And perhaps we can read this to mean that the goal was not to win or to conquer in that first moment of seeing the promised land. Perhaps it was to search all along for a proper way forward, merely to search for a new way of being, a new story to tell, a new set of lines to repeat, as opposed to the old story of weakness and fear. Given the Parsha's obsession with this verb, it's no surprise that the word shows up again at the end of the Parsha, even in a context that has nothing to do with the spies. In this case, it comes from the commandment to wear tzitzit, the fringes on our talises. V'hayalachem letzitzit, this shall be your fringe, we read. Or item oto, and you should look at it. Uzchartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam, and you shall remember all the commandments that God has commanded. And then, v'lo taturu, acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem, we read. You shall not look for something with your heart or your eyes. Again with taturu, this unusual verb choice, latur. The text implies that when we look at things around us, sometimes those things can knock us out of equilibrium. The world is filled with temptations that make us feel good and arguments that feel good and people who sometimes make us feel good but don't ultimately serve us. And the tzitzit somehow is supposed to be a corrective, keeping us on track. For this reason, commenting on this verse, Bahya ibn Pakuda, the 11th century sage, taught that as we try to understand ourselves and follow the commandments, sometimes we need to clear our mind from the empty seductions of the world. He writes that the core of the commandment to wear tzitzit is to try to shut your eyes and spare your senses from beholding that which you have no need of, and shun superfluous spectacle as much as you can, instead focusing on these fringes. For Bahya, the purpose of the tzitzit is to center ourselves and our experience and remember what we believe and who we are. In his view, we can drown out the noise of the world by focusing on the fringes on our clothing, reminding ourselves that we have a holy mission, setting aside our animal instincts of fear and needing to accept exactly who we are and finding a healthy way to live in this world. If we are to do what you rightly urge us to do, Leah, we'll have to find some way of centering our own experience and drowning out the noise and other voices in our lives, like the tzitzit encourages us to do. We'll have to try to be like Joshua and Caleb, seeking what is possible and new while resisting the memories of how we've responded to trauma in the past. We will need to write a new script, removing the barriers and noise around us, giving ourselves the space to look for something better. Shabbat Shalom.